When you first get a piece of leather, it doesn't matter whether it's a small piece that you might have bought from eBay or a whole hide. The first job is to inspect the hide. Because leather is a natural product, it's a cow and it's a herd animal. They bite each other, they rub against barbed wire fences, they get insect bites, and some have brands on them. So the hide needs to be checked, or the piece of leather needs to be checked. So always look at the right side of the leather, the good side, the side that will be on show. And it's preferable to have quite a big flat area, especially if you've got a big hide or a big piece, and you inspect it. Now this hide that I've got in front of me here is an aged kind of hide. It's not a uniform colour, so some of the scars won't be as visible if it was a single colour. I'll show you the difference between this kind of leather and a standard single colour leather. So this is a piece of single colour leather. It's only one colour, uniform throughout, unlike the aged one, which has a mottled effect. Generally, if you buy aged leather, it will come from, I wouldn't say a grade 2 hide, but scars, they're not as visible as they are on a single colour hide. So you can get away with leaving some of the scars on with a distressed, aged, whatever you want to call it, leather, two-tone. They are less visible. What you do is you lay it on the bench and you inspect. Stretch it as well, because stretching will open up any tiny little holes that possibly may be in it. You can't always see them. And you've got to work out whether you want any defects in the leather. With something like this, I'm not as bothered as I would be with the single colour leather. Now generally if you buy single colour leather, they are better quality hides, there are a few less scars, and you get a little bit more out of them sometimes. It's not always the case, but sometimes you do. Just because the leather is very expensive doesn't mean it's going to be a better quality as far as scars are concerned. It is a natural product, so they vary dramatically from hide to hide. I can buy two hides at the same time of exactly the same leather, and one will be fantastic and the other one will be possibly terrible. So once you've inspected the leather and you find any defects, flip the hide over, find the defect on the back. It will show up on the back of the hide as well. Less noticeable, but it will show up, and mark the back of the hide. Because one thing you shouldn't do with leather is draw on the surface. Sometimes you have to if you are stitching through the leather and you're putting a design in it and you want to stitch, then you need to draw something onto the leather and stitch on that line. In this case, we're just talking about the quality of the hides. So once you've found them, mark them on the back and you can kind of omit them. This part of this hide is generally passable for the job that I'm using it for. So I'm not going to mark anything on there. So we have a hole here, quite bad scars here. Just here we have a scar. It's quite an old scar and it's not very big, so potentially this could be left in, but I will kind of mark it on the hide, and also towards the neck end of the hide we have these creases. So these would have been creases from the animal's neck, the neck rolls, and that's what these are. They can potentially be left in or put in areas that are less visible. So if it's the back of something, this part of the leather is what we would use. So you have to work out when you're inspecting the hide whether there's pieces that you can use but you'll use in certain areas, pieces that you can't use anywhere, scars that are visible but you'll leave them in. So I'm going to mark all these on this hide now. After I've done that, I'll be able to actually flip it over and then I can start to work on the back. I never work on the front. If I'm cutting patterns out and pieces out, then always work on the back. You sometimes have to think in reverse, because obviously what is on the front is on the back, so you've got to kind of be able to think in that kind of way. But sometimes it doesn't matter, because if you're cutting things out that are left and right, you will have one of each, but they'll be mirrored. So as long as you mirror each one, then you don't have to think that way. So I'll mark all these now and then flip the leather over. Now it's up to you what you mark with. I use a marker pen on the back. That's why I never write on the front, because marker pen will not come off. You can get chalk pens, things like that. That bit I don't want to use. That bit I don't want to use. I'll put a leather chart up on screen so you can see a hide and where the neck is, where the butt is, and where the belly is. Belly generally has more defects, more stretch marks, because 90% of leather that you buy is from a cow, which is a female, and females get pregnant, they get stretch marks, and they generally can be quite inferior around the belly. But sometimes it's what you want. Sometimes the belly has more stretch, but it isn't a nice quality as far as the surface finish is concerned, but you can stretch it a lot more than you can down the spine. The butt is generally the better quality, but not always the case, and anything from the spine outwards diminishes in quality as you get closer to the belly. So you can see on the reverse of the leather, these marks here, obviously these marks here. So you can see things, defects through the leather. You can also feel them. If you put your hand and rub it across, you can feel there's an indentation just here where that is. So when you come to mark it, you know exactly where you're marking. But all this here, it's not good. You can see on the back a scar just there, and that's obviously that scar that's there. But that I would possibly leave in, but all this area here I wouldn't. So I'm just going to draw around the whole lot really, because even though I would leave that in, there's no point, because you're not gaining much by cutting a piece here, because you've still got these scars just here, or these wrinkles just here. So these are the neck rolls that I showed you earlier. You see? Here they are, and there they are on the back. The hide's now been marked. It's now good side down on the bench. Before you start cutting anything out, you need to decide which are the most important pieces, which are the pieces that you're cutting out are going to be on show, and then you put them on the good parts of the leather first. So you find the best part and you cut the most obvious piece, the piece that is visible all the time, and you go, I'm going to put this here, and then you work out where you put every other piece, regarding obviously the importance of the piece, whether the piece is seen all the time, whether it's partially hidden or hidden completely, and you work out where you want to put them on the leather. Now, like I said earlier, I always work on the back of the leather. When you first start to work on it, you'll notice if you've got a relatively big piece, it will not lie flat. Leather comes from the shape of a cow. Trying to get the shape of a cow to be a flat piece of leather is not always as easy as you might think. If you work on sections of the leather, you can flatten them sections and then move on. I always pin leather to a bench. I've got a bench that is, just made of chipboard, and I can pin straight through the leather, through the bench, and that will hold the leather in place. Alternatively, you can use little clamps, clamp them to the bench. I want to start working from this piece here. I have a pattern piece that I'm going to cut out. This is my pattern. Now, it doesn't matter what you make your patterns out of at the end of the day. You've got to make them out of cardboard so you can draw around them. But remember, if you cut them out of cardboard, you need to add any seam allowances that you're going to put on. This pattern at the minute has no seam allowances, so as I draw around it, I will add the seam allowance to the pattern. Now, symmetrical pattern, I'm going to cut the pattern in half. Don't need this bit. And I need to find out which orientation I'm going to put it. Now, unlike vinyl and fabrics, leather has no direction. You can cut whatever piece you want in whatever rotation you want to. If it was a fabric has a nap, everything has to run the same way. You have to have a direction that every pattern goes that is correct when it's assembled. But leather doesn't matter. But what does matter is the amount of stretch that's in the spine. Butt area is generally less stretchy than the belly. If you need stretch in something, and you need quite a bit, you would cut it from the belly. But then you are limited to the quality of the surface finish on the belly. You might find nice areas that are very stretchy, just above where the belly is, that you can use. So that's another thing to consider before you start cutting anything out. You've already seen the chart, the height chart, so you know the best parts of the leather. So I'm just going to pin maybe this section of leather to the bench. When you put your pins in, you want to keep as close to the edge of the hide as you can, because the last thing you want to do is start to put holes where you don't need them. So I'm just kind of pre-stretching the leather a little bit, because if you cut a pattern that is the size you want and then you put it on something stretchy and you cut it out, it will be oversized, it will be too big. So just giving the leather pre-stretch, you want to flatten it, but you want to also give it a little bit of a stretch. That will help to flatten it anyway. So that should be absolutely fine. It's flat enough. I have stretched it a little bit. I'll put another one there. Right, that's where I want it. Happy with that. Now I can't pin this pattern to the leather. If the pattern had a seam allowance on it, I could, because I'd pin where the seam allowance is. But as this has not got a seam allowance on, I'm going to tape it down. I'm just going to use some masking tape, or painter's tape, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to start from the centre line. So this is a symmetrical pattern, it's half a pattern. My line is here and it gets flipped over. You want to get the pattern as flat as you can. The pattern is now on the leather. I'm going to put in the centre line. This pattern needs adding to here, so it's plus 1 inch there and plus there. So I need to add 1 inch to the edge of this, some to there. It's a measurement where it's going to get cut off anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but I don't want too much. We have a seam allowance here and a seam allowance here. Now on something that is so small like this, I would normally use a 3/8 seam allowance. I still might use a 3/8 seam allowance, but what I will do with this, I will draw around the pattern, just because I want a visible stitch line that I can stitch through. So if you ever have to be really precise with where your stitch line is, it's always better to draw it in. These seams are like darts almost, and it's very critical where they finish, where this point comes to. So having the stitch line drawn on is best practice really. Then you can finish your stitch in exactly the right place. If I have to add something onto my pattern, especially with leather, I will always add more than I need. It's better to actually cut a little bit extra than to have to cut this again because you haven't cut enough, and wasting leather is quite expensive. Marking where the pattern ends and starts, and that's it. Now you've noticed that I've used a biro. I generally always buy Bic, they're just better. Not found another brand yet that is better than Bic. I'm not sponsored by Bic. So mark on as much information you can on the leather, and then you won't have any problems when you come to sew it together, glue it together or whatever. You know exactly what you're doing because you've got reference marks of where things start and finish. When it comes to sewing, the same. Where you start and finish is quite critical on a lot of jobs, so marking it onto the leather is the best thing to do. So I'm just going to flip this pattern over now. Now that the piece is drawn out on the leather, the next thing is to cut it out. Now, there's a little bit of, I don't know, debate, whatever, about cutting leather, whether you use a cheap pair of scissors These are not cheap, but they're not expensive at all. Or you go out and buy a pair of shears, not scissors, shears, and leather shears, and you can throw a lot of money at leather shears. They can be quite expensive. They have a lifetime guarantee. They will be sharpened by the factory if you send them back. Trouble with that is you need 2 pair, because while one's getting sharpened, you need another pair to use. Personally, I buy these. And I'll tell you why. First reason, these are bloody heavy. These are probably heavier than all 4 of these. I hate these scissors, shears. They're painful. They don't sit nice on my hand. They're cold. Any metal that you hold is cold. So if you buy a pair of shears that are all metal, then you're into cold shears. And not very nice. I couldn't use these all day. They would hurt my thumb here. So I buy these. These are Fiskars. I've used them for probably over 30 years. These are probably older than these. I probably got these when I was in my teens. They've done a lot of work, but over time your hands grow, they change shape, and these are they just hurt my hand. So I would never buy a pair of expensive, these are not super expensive shears. And I have multiple pairs because I'll be cutting out, I'll be sewing, I'll be doing something else in a vehicle, and you generally use a pair of scissors, use them, put them down, and then you move the piece out of the way, you do whatever. So you'll always have a pair on your cutting bench, a pair with your sewing machine, a pair somewhere else, a spare pair, whatever. I class these as disposable. I probably buy a pair every 2 years. I should buy a pair every year because they get used and abused. They cut absolutely everything from zips to carpet to plastic to leather to curtain fabric, paper, anything. Not fussy what they cut. And I don't want to be going, oh, I can't cut this with these, I can't cut a zip with these because if I damage the blade, then I've got to get them resharpened. Good thing about Fiskars is you can sharpen yourself just like that. This is a Fiskar scissor sharpener or tuner. It's not really a sharpener, it doesn't sharpen the scissors. If the scissors are super blunt, it'll kind of ish sharpen them, but it's like a chef with his steel. Every time he uses his knives, he gives them a with his steel. I use his knives, and that just keeps the edge tuned and nice. It takes away any little tiny imperfections on the cutting edge, gives them a little bit of a sharpen, and they stay good for quite a long time unless you abuse them. This tuner is no longer available. I've had this for probably over 30 years. I've had this for. I used to work for a marquee company back in I would have been in my mid-20s, so that would have been 95. So I've had this since the mid-90s. And it still works every day. Every time I pick it up, use it, it works. And also, scissors are a bit like gloves. If you buy a pair of gloves online, you'll put them on, you go, they don't fit. They're too big, too small, fingers are too long, thumbs are not wide enough, whatever. Scissors are exactly the same in my opinion. If you buy a pair of scissors online and you can't use them, they're uncomfortable, send them back straight away, and go to a shop and try a pair of scissors out. Make sure they're comfortable in your hand, you're happy with the weight. Once you find a pair that you like, even if they're cheap, these are Fiskars are about 20 quid, something like that. Now, an expensive pair of shears can run you into the hundreds of pounds. Over a lifetime of the shears, they're probably a good investment, but if you don't want to use them because they're cold and uncomfortable and heavy, then they're not. So buy what's comfortable for you. Even if they're cheap, if they last you a year, you buy another pair in a year. 20 quid a year for scissors is nothing. They're disposable items in my opinion. They're not meant to last forever, and they've got to be comfortable. You've got to want to use them. With these, I like using them. They fit nice in my hand, they're tight, they're snug. They don't last forever, but hey ho, I don't throw them away. They get sent home and the kids use them for craft stuff, and there's a couple of pairs in the kitchen, and we're not short of scissors at home, even though sometimes you can't find a pair. So I'll cut this out, use scissors. If this was thick leather like this stuff, this is a completely different kind of leather. It's stiff, it's twice as thick as this, And this is used for things like bags, cases, things that you need more rigidity to, belts, that kind of usage. Then you'll be using a knife or any bladed tool, but not scissors, because trying to cut this with scissors, you don't get a very good finish, so it would be knife. But on upholstery kind of leather, then scissors are absolutely fine. 90% of the time you're sewing the piece, so the edge doesn't matter, it's the seam allowance that you're cutting. You're not cutting a finished edge. Any finished edges that are cut, that are visible, you always use a knife anyway. You very rarely use scissors, because scissors will give you a wavy, slightly jagged cut. I'll cut this out. Obviously, if I cut, the piece is now cut. I've got the seam allowance, the amount that I needed to add extra on the sides, and that piece is ready for the next stage. This piece here is going to get put onto something rigid. When you put leather on something rigid, whatever's underneath will be seen. So if that surface is got loads of imperfections, them imperfections will show through the leather, because this would be getting glued down to a rigid piece. When I sew the seams, the seam allowance will be the same. It will be visible through the leather. It will raise it up at that point, and if the rest is glued down, you'll have a lip running all the way around the piece that is very visible. It's 3 times the thickness it should be. It'll be 3 times the thickness, or 2 times the thickness if you open the seam up. Leather can be thinned. If you want to buy thin leather, you can buy leather that has already been thinned to less than you would normally get it. This leather is generally leather for general upholstery is around about 1 millimetre thick. Sometimes it's 1.2, sometimes it's 0.8, sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. But when you buy it, if you buy it from a supplier, they will let you know the thickness, and it will be between a measurement, because obviously it's not a machine made thing, it's natural. You'll get some discrepancy in how thick it is. Sometimes there's a bigger tolerance, sometimes there's a smaller tolerance. Upholstery leather is like it's 0.8 of a millimetre and 1 millimetre. If it's a thicker leather, it might be 1 millimetre to 1.2 millimetres. In some countries, not sold that way, not sold by the thickness, sold by the weight, just like paper is. So it would be, in America, ounces. So it's sold in ounces, so obviously the bigger the number, the thicker the leather, because that is a weight per area, and that formula never changes. But if the number goes up, then it's a thicker hide. I don't know what conversion is. If I find the conversion, I will put it up on screen. So yeah, this is, I think, about 0.8, something like that. With this piece, I want to thin the seams. Now, that's called skiving. There are many different skiving tools on the market. Some work better than others. Some are for the stiffer leather, like the bag leather, and some are more for this. You can buy skiving machines, and you can buy thinning machines, but on something like this, sometimes they're not suitable. The hobbyist kind of ones are not great for soft leather at all, and are better for more the boot type. They will thin and skive the leather better, but you can buy hand tools to do the same thing. Now I'm going to skive these seams. This is my skiving knife. It's a bladed one, so you buy a pack of blades, and that's the blade. It's not a very big blade, can flip it round, so kind of use it twice kind of thing, and it just slots in to a groove on the knife. Now when you skive anything, if you skive on an uneven surface, potentially you might put holes in the leather. Anything underneath the leather will protrude, and it will be a raised surface, so you will take that off more than the rest of the leather. So use a piece of glass, a very flat piece of wood, or I use just a piece of chipboard that's got a laminate surface on it. It's getting a bit tired of this now. Sometimes you've got to keep changing them. Anytime you get imperfections in it, defects, whatever, you need to change it. So I'll get a new blade. So I've got a new blade in here now. Now this is kind of a disposable skiving knife, not expensive, but to change them after a few years, I think. I've had this for many years. It does need changing. They just kind of start changing shape with use, and I'm just going to start to skive the leather. Now with a brand new blade, it will take a nice clean cut. So So when I skive these seams, I want to come a little bit on the inside of the leather. So we start at the top, and there we go, and that's taken off a very fine amount. Now it depends how thin you want these, depends how far you go with it. So you can get it down to being paper thin, but just gently take it off. Don't try and do it all in one go, or else you'll end up going through. So that's about as thin as I want it. You can see that we've taken off quite a bit of leather there. As it goes lighter at the end here, it becomes very thin. That's absolutely fine now. So I'll do the same with this. Just work it down to being thin. And you don't need any pressure for this, just gently over the surface. As the blade gets a little bit duller, you can just go over it gently. So I'm going to take the majority off while the blade is new. So also get rid of your bits because they protrude as well. You can see what's protruded there. You just got to keep your eye on what you're doing with this. The last thing you want to do is cut a piece of leather, start to skive it, and then put a hole in it and have to cut it out again. Now skiving is easier on nice leather. If you cut anything from the belly and you try and skive it, you'll probably find it very hard. So another thing to consider when you choose where you're cutting from. When the blade is starting to get a little bit blunt, so I'm just going to now go over these pieces and just take any unevenness off. You can sometimes end up with grooves where you've skived it away and you end up with a divot. So I'm just going over it just to kind of even out any potential divots. I'm going to flip the blade around. So I've used this part of the blade, I'm going to use the other half now. So that piece is now ready for sewing. Now when it comes to sewing, that is a whole video all by itself, sewing leather. But I will tell you, if you've got a sewing machine and it's just a general domestic sewing machine, there's a good chance you'll not sew through leather, or you'll not sew through leather very well. If your machine will sew through vinyl, upholstery vinyl, which is probably about as thick as leather, stretches the same, a little bit weaker. If your machine will sew that, then chances are your machine will sew leather. The best machines to use on leather are walking foot machines. That's what they're kind of designed for. And before you even start to sew the piece of leather you cut, that you're using for a job, use one of the crappy areas that you've marked off that you're not going to use and test your machine. Make sure your machine is happy with the leather, make sure your machine's set up right for the leather, the tension's right, the stitch size is right, and you're happy. Once you're happy, you can sew. It's tricky to sew leather, not because it's leather, but because of this surface here. It's probably one of the most grippiest surfaces in the world. That, we're fine. That, as soon as I turn it down, give it a little bit of pressure, and I physically try and push that leather, doesn't want to go anywhere. And it's the same on the sewing machine bed. So if you sew a piece of leather, what you do is, this is my seam, I'm putting another piece on top, that's the piece on top. As I sew, my hand underneath the leather, I'll lift as much of that leather off the machine bed as I can. That means there's less grippiness. That bit there will move, but as soon as we've got that bit there, it doesn't want to move. All this is keeping it almost glued to the bench. So always, on bigger pieces of leather, lift as much as you can. Even if you've got to do this kind of thing, lift as much as you can off the machine bed, and that will make sewing much easier. Don't treat it like a fabric, it is a completely different thing. Vinyl doesn't have this issue. Vinyl will slide along a bench, not a problem on the good side, on the bad side. If you're sewing this side, yeah, absolutely fine. It will sew like a lot of other things. It will move across the bed of the machine quite easily, but that side doesn't. Now, before I can sew this piece, if you remember when I drew the pattern out, I put in the stitch lines. Well, the skiving process has removed those, so I'm going to have to put those back in. Now that I've actually sewn this together, I need to test fit it. Don't just assume that you've done everything right. Because of the inconsistency in the stretching leather, some areas stretch more than others, it's always best just to try it on, just to see how it looks. Also, you can work out whether you want the seam to be running this way, or you want to open it up. Try it both ways, see which way I like best. And I think personally, I like the seam to be running this way underneath. You've got to think about the item that you're covering. This is the tailgate, so when it's in situ, it looks like that. And this is the bit that you will see. That's the hinge end. So it'll be closed like that, and then open, and you'll be stood here. So you'll see this edge here first. I'd rather the seam be going that way underneath. It's just less obvious. I want the seam on the top to run the same way as the seam on the bottom, both going inwards like that, and the seam that are here will run back in towards them both. So everything's even. So once you are happy, you can use almost any glue to glue leather, even things like PVA, wallpaper paste, super glue, or typically what would be used on leather is contact adhesive. You can use a spray contact adhesive, you can use a brush on contact adhesive. Doesn't matter, it will glue the leather the same. The most important thing is not the leather, because leather is easy to glue, it's what you're gluing it to. Now, some things are easier to glue than others. PVA glues well to wood, and it glues well to leather. But on something like this, I would be using contact adhesive, and I'd be using a spray. To glue this with a brush, I'd be here for ages brushing on contact adhesive. Not the easiest thing to work with, it's very sticky, very snot-like, doesn't spread very well. I'm going to be using contact adhesive, but spray contact adhesive. You can buy ones in tins, aerosol cans. They will work quite alright with leather, but like I say, it's the surface you're gluing down to that you need to worry about more. So you need to know what the surface is, what it's made of, and whether you can get a contact adhesive that will glue to it. Now, a lot of plastics will have what the plastic is made from, but this doesn't. I suspect it's ABS, and ABS is okay to glue to. Not fantastic, but it's okay. But the surface needs preparing. I would sand this down. I would give it a wipe over with acetone. Acetone will get rid of any grease. This has come from a mould, and there's probably mould release on here. There might not be, but the chances are there is. So wiping over with something like acetone will just get rid of any debris, any grease, any release agents, anything that will inhibit the glue. And to give the glue the best chance, a bit of a key as well, contact adhesive, all contact adhesive, I've not come across one yet that can't be reactivated with heat. Whether you use a heat gun or a steamer, doesn't matter. The heat reactivates the glue and then gives you time to work with it. Now, the easiest way to apply glue to a shape that isn't flat, also if you leave threads dangling inside, they will show through the leather. If you end up gluing leather down to a hard surface, then even a thickness of a thread will show underneath. You'll get that impression of the thread. So make sure all your stragglers are removed. And to glue to a shape like this, what I do is I turn it inside out, I put it on the shape, and then I can apply glue. Now, if you remember, the seams are going to get turned in, so I want to make sure I've got the seams turned in. So when I apply glue, I'll apply glue, turn the seams in, and then apply glue over the edge of the top seam of the uppermost seam allowance on both sides. So I'll come back to you once I've prepped this surface, and then we'll get on to gluing. That's the prep done on the door card. Because I'm going to use a spray contact adhesive, I don't want to get the glue everywhere. I'm going to put a plastic sheet down. So it's always best when you glue things is to put something down to protect your working area. Now, I'm not really going to talk about glues in this video because I have a 45-minute video out on spray contact adhesive. So if you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description to that one. You can go and watch that, and that'll explain glue a lot more. But this is just a standard high heat spray contact adhesive, but I will leave a link in the description to where I get this glue from. Now, it does come in 25 litre tins and 5 litre tins. I'm not sure if they do it in 1 litre tins, but you can buy it in 1 litre tins, I know that. So I need to apply glue to the seam first. So I just want to make sure that these seams are exactly where I want them to be. The seams now are facing the way I want them to face. I'm going to apply glue to the whole of the leather. I'm going to remove it, and then I'll apply glue to this part here. Now, because I'm using a spray contact adhesive, I'm going to give it one coat. I'm going to leave it for a little while and then give it another coat. Leather is quite fibrous and porous, so the glue will kind of seep into the leather. So once the glue's seeped in, the glue that goes on top will be more useful as glue. It'll be actually on the surface rather than embedded into the leather. When it comes to brushing, you don't necessarily need to do the same, just because you generally apply it thicker when you use a brush. When you spray, you can spray a little bit less. Now, with rigid plastics, metals, anything that is non-porous, you only need one coat. It's not going to have any benefit applying a second coat once this one's dried. There's enough glue on there. They say you need about 80% coverage to 100% when you're spraying. You'll probably get better coverage with a brush. It'll be 100% coverage, but it won't be the most even of coverages. When you actually buy a tin of glue, it'll tell you the amount of time that you need for the glue to go tacky before you apply the part. I'm going to tell you a completely different way of doing it. So I'm going to walk away from this now, I'm going to go to the shop, get some lunch, come back, have lunch, sit around for a little while, maybe do something else, and then I'll come back to this. This, at that point, will be slightly tacky. You won't be able to put the pieces together and they bond. You have to apply pressure and heat. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm just going to go have some lunch. I'll come back to you after lunch. Probably been at least an hour since I applied glue to the leather and to the surface of this. Now, a lot of you might think that's quite a long time. As you can see, it's no longer tacky, and that's exactly what I want. For me to try and get this on here with tacky glue would be virtually impossible. It would be sticking like crazy. But if I put this on here, absolutely fine. I can manipulate it, I can get it into the correct position, and then I can worry about it actually bonding. So we have a weird shape. As you can see, this shape comes in here, so I have to start on this end. So that's something you have to think about when you're actually gluing leather to something. So I'm also I use a bit of plastic. So this plastic is the same plastic that I made the pattern from, and it acts like a non-stick paper. So it just gives me a little bit more slip room between the leather and here. And I'm going to start by just finding the corners of this. Just gonna put it there for now. I'm not going to put much pressure on it. The more pressure you apply to the leather, the more it's going to bond. That is tacked into place, but I'm not completely sure whether it's in exactly the right place. I need to double check things before I try and stick it down permanently. Flip this over, just have a see. So I think that is in the correct position. I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure, not a lot, just a gentle rub. You probably can't see what I'm doing because obviously getting the camera where my head is not possible. Right, now I can flip it over and I can start to put the rest in place. I'm going to have to kind of stretch this over the end here. Just slowly rolling it over. I'm just going to release this a little bit, just on the ends. It still will release. I'm just trying to get rid of any wrinkles and get this to lie as flat as possible. Don't want to stretch it too much at the minute. So you can see that I can still release it when I need to. Right, I can now work this back corner again now. Right, so that is on. You can see that there's lots of issues with it, but because it's not actually stuck properly, I can sort them out as I go along. Just manipulating the leather a little bit. So I've just slowly manipulated the leather. Hold on, still need to move it this way a little bit. This corner's a little bit off, but because it's not been set, and the glue is still not really light glue, I can still manipulate it. So just pull it away a little bit and get that corner a little bit better. So as you can see, because I've let the glue go off completely, I can still manipulate it, still remove it and then put it back on. Now I'm going to use two tools now, in fact three. One's my hands, one is a flat tool, and the other is steam. I'm going to turn the steamer on. Now this can be done with a heat gun, but it is better with a steamer because a steamer acts more like an iron. You've got a physical heat plate to be able to push down on the leather and give it pressure. At this point I could probably give it loads of pressure and it'll stick, but a little bit of heat will just help. Now this is the flat tool that I'm going to use. It's just a scraper that I got from a hardware shop and reshaped it. And it's got no pointed end, it's not sharp in any way, it's nice and smooth on the edge, but it's flat enough just to push the leather in at the bottom here. So now the simmer's warming up, I'm just going to start along here and get this bit in and then work backwards. So that piece is on. Now the ends need to be trimmed. That's going to get done with a scalpel. I'm going to trim as close to the actual, you probably can't see, there's a tiny groove that I've put in with this, and that is my cut line. That's where I want to cut to. Leather's quite good because it can be marked with tools like this. You don't need pen, pencil. You can use a flat bladed tool or a pointed tool. Do exactly the same thing. It'll mark the surface of the leather, and you can then cut to that line. So that's basically how you would glue something in leather that isn't a flat shape. Flat shape, easy peasy, 2 pieces. So I'll leave a link in the description to where I get the glue from and any tools that I've used. Also, leather suppliers, you can buy leather online in pieces. I do have leather on eBay that's from old jobs. When I buy leather, I buy it by the hide or half hides if I'm lucky, but sometimes I'll use a hide and a half and I've bought 2 and I have a hide left over. I'll put those hides on eBay. So that's the basics of how to use leather, what to do, what not to do. Once you've finished your project and you've got some leather left over, you need to make sure that you store it correctly. I always try and store my leather on rolls. Takes up less room. I do this because I don't want it to get creased. So if I was just to fold this leather up and put it on a pile, I'd end up with loads of creases on. This has just been left at the bottom of a pile and you can see that it's quite heavily creased. You can get rid of the creases, but it's just a job that you shouldn't need to do. If you store your leather correctly, so put it onto a roll. If it's a big piece, put it onto a roll. If it's tiny and you want to save it, I'm sure you'll find a little place that you can just stack it, but don't put a fold in it. Just lay it down. If you want to lay some more leather on top, make sure that's flat as well. You'll be absolutely fine with small pieces like that. But on a big piece, if you've got a quarter of a hide left over, put it onto a roll. Make sure when you put it onto a roll, you try and get it to be as flat as possible. You don't want to add creases, and just roll it up. And there we go. I'm just going to give it a quick that'll just tighten the roll up a bit. So just a couple of pieces of tape. You can always write on the tape as well if you want to what leather it is, if you bought a specific colour, so you know which leather it is then. And that now goes under my bench. If I have hides that I'm working on and I don't want to keep rolling them up every time in between doing things, because sometimes the bigger jobs I don't do all in one go. I might have spaces in between waiting for things to turn up or parts or other things. I will hang the leather up. So if you look just behind me there, hanging up, there's 2 hides. Those are the hides that I'm working on at the minute. But when you cut a lot of things out, you don't always cut everything out in one go. You might cut half a job out, do some sewing, whatever. You don't want to have piles of cut out pieces that you're going to get confused with. So always kind of work on a specific area at a time, and then there's no confusion about what you've cut out either. Right, so I think that is enough information for you. So if you enjoyed that video, give it the old thumbs up and I hope to see you again. Thanks for watching. Bye.